All right, hey everybody, welcome back to Patriot to the Core. This is Tim Larkin, part 2. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I split this one up because he gave me a lot of time and he gave me a lot of detail about his background, which I really appreciated. So in part 1, we talk about his career in the military, actually before he even went in the military, why he went in the Navy, why he wanted to be a SEAL, why he was prepared to be a SEAL from a very young age, and why he was taking cold showers as a young teenager, and how he would sneak on base there at Coronado and work out and exercise. He got in trouble and kicked off there for a while, but then they kind of started letting him hang around and see what was going on. So then we lead up to where he starts his business now, Target Focused Training. That's where we're going to pick up here. If you are not familiar with Tim Larkin, that's probably a good thing, because he told me that most of the civilians that he meets or that come to his classes, they come to him because they've been attacked. It's been some type of violent encounter and they want to learn how to protect themselves. He's an author of When Violence is the Answer. That's his latest book. He also is the author of some other books that I've got in the show notes. I really liked what the guy teaches. I like his what he teaches about mindset and then training, and he does not sugarcoat anything. I mean, you have to understand that there are violent people out there, and he shares the difference between social and asocial behavior. There are people that want to harm you, and we need to be able to protect ourselves if that happens. So what he's kind of known for is violence is rarely the answer, but when it is, it's the only answer. All right, so let's hear from Tim.
By not having to train under him, I was free to sit there and really look at the program and say, okay, with nothing held back, with no preconceived notions, what's the best way to deliver this information that gives the client the best result? And that's kind of where, target focused training started coming together, and the whole idea of injury came right back. The idea that that's the most important thing. The most important thing is that the only thing that changes anything in a truly facing grievous bodily harm situation is if you can put an injury on the other guy. And an injury bypasses bigger, faster, and stronger. And my thought process was, most people only have time to do like a seminar. And therefore, if I'm going to have them for a short amount of time, I got to look at it like a high density training protocol, similar to what I did in the military. But, the requirements that I put myself and my instructors under was is that you have to imagine it's on Friday, you get information that a loved one, whoever you want to think about, Monday morning is going to be facing asocial violence. You're going to know that the threat is bigger, faster, and stronger. You're going to know the threat carries weapons, and there's going to be more than one. Knowing that, you have 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, to work with this loved one, because you're not going to be there when it happens. They're going to have to deal with this themselves. Knowing that, what would you train them? And that was really profound, because that got us to really focus on efficiency, effectiveness first, making sure that everything you teach somebody out of the gate is immediately effective and usable to them. And that once you made somebody effective, you then had the ability to make them efficient later, but efficiency is a luxury. Effectiveness, as Peter Drucker pointed out, effectiveness is learning the right things first, which is the most important, identifying what are the right things. And then efficiency is doing the right things the right way. And that's kind of how I approach training a client. The most important thing is that they need to understand how to injure a sensory system or a structure of the human body. They need to understand that there are areas in the body that are susceptible to injury regardless of strength and size. That no matter how much conditioning you do, you can't protect these areas of the human body. And so all of us as humans are susceptible to injury in these areas. And once you understand and focus solely on those areas, you can get a huge result. You can literally bypass bigger, faster, and stronger when you understand that. And it's kind of being able to give somebody the Rosetta Stone to self-protection, when it comes to dealing with other humans. That was my passion, and that's really what I started to kind of focus on. And I gave a class on September 9th, 2001 in New York City, about a block away from the World Trade Center. I was done on the 9th and 10th was when the 8th and 9th is when I did the seminar. I flew home on the 10th. I woke up the morning of the 11th to 9/11, and the area that I had just been training was completely wiped out from the things coming down. Now, what was interesting was the guys I was training were all international bankers, financiers. They flew all over the world, and they wanted to film the training for their own personal use. It was never supposed to be distributed or anything. It was just these, I had a film crew there filming it. People called me up that whole week that were there telling me their stories, how a couple of guys were in there. They all got out. Fortunately, everybody in my class all got out, but they had all lost friends. And they said how fascinating it was, because one of the things I was showing them was all the things that you can bring on an airplane that are still allowed. And I showed like a box cutter. I showed a lot of the things that obviously came out in the news after. Mm-hmm. And the guys were shocked. And I also told, the idea that, hey, the most important thing is that you injure somebody. And these guys, to a man, said, hey, you should use these tapes. More people need to see it. I want my family to see these tapes. I want And so this became the 9/11 tapes, which really kind of changed my focus from corporate and, military law enforcement, which is really kind of my world where I was at, either really exclusive corporate security or, super high-end VIP type, personnel and contract work, to now is going more broad-based civilian after 9/11. And that's where, target focused training kind of really took off. And, today I still do probably 25% of my training is probably professional, and what I mean by that is, the professional protectors, military law enforcement, also corporate protectors, I'll do those classes, but the vast majority, 75% now, are just regular civilians from all walks of life.
Well, that's one thing that's I like about your book, When Violence is the Answer, is that your second book? Or
yeah, that's my third.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing great about it is you've got these stories from former students, and how they've applied, what you've taught them. I mean, I remember there's a lady that was attacked in a Home Depot parking lot that you talk about. There was a girl in college who a guy climbed through her window and tried to rape her, and she was able to inflict pain or injury and got him off. And there's so many good examples in there.
Yeah, and the whole idea behind the book, and the reason I wrote the book, is because I want to reach, and that's why I appreciate, being able to come on podcasts like yours and speak to your audience, because I'm hoping that a vast majority of the people that are listening to this right now are people that have not had violence enter their life yet. 70% of the people that come, like, if you don't know my name, it's probably a good thing, because the majority of people that come and train with me are people that have already had violence occur in their life. Usually it averages out to about 70%. And only 30% are proactive and come out prior to something, affecting their lives. And I can't undo what's already been done. I mean, if violence has happened to you, all I can do is come back, show you, okay, here's a whole new game plan that you can apply. This will minimize the chance of violence ever re-entering your life again. And here are the skill sets, worst case scenario, if the black swan event happens, how you can protect yourself using your brain and body to take out the other guy. And that's great, but I can't undo what's already happened. Whereas if I meet somebody who hasn't had violence enter their life and I can get this information to them, there's a really great chance that if they apply the knowledge, they can create a lifestyle and they can create an awareness that minimizes the chance of asocial violence ever coming into their life. So that's why it's great. And I knew I could reach more people, via the book, than I can, in live trainings. I mean, I'm never going to be able to train all the people that want to train. But I can put out some really great principles, and the book's already got a lot of feedback from people just saying that, they've changed behaviors, which is huge. My real goal is, as you go through the book, I'm hoping people will identify things that they're doing, risks that they're taking, that the book kind of graphically, gives very good, we mix, real life stories with real information. And I think it's a good mix. It's an entertaining read, but people come back and tell me that it literally has compelled behavioral change, which is really what I was gunning for when I put the book together. Because most people don't understand a lot of the unnecessary risks they're taking. And what I try to put it akin to, prior to reading the book, a lot of people were sleeping with their heads on a railroad track, thinking everything's fine because the train hasn't come by yet. And after reading the book, I hope people realize, hey, you know what? If I just don't sleep with my head on the railroad track, I'm not going to have to worry about that train. And that's really what I try to do with this, is just have people make better decisions. And you have to do that through stories that, you're talking about, where people unfortunately, had to use the information to save their lives. But what's interesting is the two people that you talked about there were two females. Each one of them, in their own way, were individuals that when they went through training, I oftentimes will say, geez, I hope this person gets a pass. I don't want anything to happen to any of my clients, but there are some people that when they react to the material, it's so difficult for them to deal with that you just hope that they don't ever have to deal with that. And that's a weird thing. Every time I train a group, I know statistically somebody in that class most likely is going to have to use the information, but I can never predict who the hell it is. And it always comes back to me with stories like what you're talking about. In the Home Depot, that woman, she had such a hard time with the material. She had been assaulted before. She literally had to stop herself during the training because it was very emotional for her, because she was, reliving a lot of, her former, assault. And of course, this is the woman that, as she's at Home Depot buying some potting plants and some fertilizer, she gets attacked. She gets literally lifted up off of her feet by a guy who's trying to throw her into his van. And what was interesting was what she said. She said as soon as she was lifted up off her feet, she realized it was happening again. But there's almost like a sense of calm that came over her, because she did have concealed carry, and she realized, I can't get to it. It's not in my hand, so that's not my primary weapon. And she realized that the way the guy grabbed her freed up her arm, and she could turn into him and strike with her elbow to the side of the neck. And that's exactly what she did. And by striking the side of the neck, there's two nerves, a vein and an artery, and you interrupt blood flow and nerve flow. So you're either going to get a vasovagal response, which is kind of like a fainting response, or you're going to get a concussion. And she got kind of the vasovagal response. The guy started to go down, and as he was going down, the next thing that she saw was his knee. And she just went right up on top of the kneecap and stomped with all of her might, and she ended up flamingoing his leg, breaking the leg above the knee. And she saw when he hit the ground that he was done. He literally was just, reaching for his leg. He was rolling around, riffing, screaming. She realized, oh, okay, he's incapacitated. It's over, meaning she didn't feel the need to draw her weapon and call. And by then, of course, security got involved and the police came in. The police were incredulous when they talked to her. They said, you would have been absolutely justified in shooting this guy. Why didn't you? And her response was really interesting. She said, well, I already knew he was non-functional. There was nothing he was going to do. So I didn't have to shoot him at that point. And that's the kind of thing. Now, this is from a woman who literally, going through training, had to take herself off the mats multiple times because she was shaking, and that's the rewarding stuff. When I never like to hear when a client has to actually use the physical training information. But what's great about it is the way we do the training, it's readily available to you. And the reason it's usable is because we focus on effectiveness first, and we make sure that people are effective and are able to protect themselves first with very straightforward strikes and information.
Yeah, I mean, in that situation, so hitting him in the neck with the elbow was is more effective than like hitting in the side of the head with elbow or the face.
Yeah. It's funny. It's really funny because in the UFC, I see it. I see the side of the neck used all the time, but people don't identify it as such. You'll see people getting shin kicked to the side of the neck. You'll see people getting punched. They're actually trying for the jaw and they go lower and they hit the side of the neck and the guy just goes out. It's a very effective strike. And it's instantaneous in the results that you get, and it's legal. It's not an illegal strike in the UFC. But it's interesting. I mean, it's far more effective than hitting somebody to the side of the head because you're going to go for a concussion there. And it's a good strike, don't get me wrong, but far more reliable is the side of the neck. That's the whole idea. The whole idea, just to explain to your listeners, the biggest change that I make in people is, normally when we look at another human being who wants to physically dominate us in some way, shape, or form, or is threatening us, we tend to notice all the differences in them, meaning they're bigger than me, they're faster than me, they're younger than me, they're more aggressive than me, they're, whatever the differences are. Whereas what you learn from alpha predators, when you look into like the prison systems and how these alpha predators look at another human being, what really differentiates us is not what a lot of us think. We would think, oh, this guy's, they're superhuman, they're not like us. Well, that's kind of true. They're not like us because they do think differently in a lot of ways. They're asocial, but it's something that we can easily apply to ourselves for our own self-protection. And probably the greatest thing is they don't look at the differences in a human being. They look at the similarities. So whereas we might be saying, oh my God, this guy's so much taller than me, the alpha predator will sit there and go, oh, he has a throat like me. Where we'll say, oh my gosh, he's faster than me. They'll say, oh, look, he has a knee like me. And that's the greatest advantage is you just redirect, because both things are true. It's just what truth is most useful to you. And that the truth that is most useful to you when your life is on the line is where can you get a big result on the other person. And this is why I call it like the Rosetta Stone of self-protection. When you understand this, you immediately go there. Same thing with her. She got grabbed, and the first thing she realized, what's available to me, she assessed what was available to her, and she goes, okay, where's a target? And she found a target. She found a place to put the work into and get a result. And it was just that simple. Now, if we took that individual that grabbed her and we threw both of them in a ring and they both knew what was happening, meaning, you're going to fight her and it's all even and everybody knows what's up. Well, we know how that would have ended up. This guy, this guy, in a traditional match. And so I try to tell people all the time, I'm not training people to be competitors and to be good at that. Training somebody to be a competitive combat sport athlete is just amazing. I mean, it's unbelievable amounts of work, unbelievable amounts of dedication. You're pitting skill against skill, and it takes years to be even adequate at doing that. And, to rise above into, the true competition area, you're like, 1 in 1,000 practitioners that can even look at competing professionally, if you're lucky. Whereas everybody can learn the skill sets of destruction. They're ridiculously simple, and they're highly effective. People say to me all the time, they say, oh, well, your system's so great, why isn't it in the UFC? And I'll say, it is. And it's undefeated, meaning it actually hasn't won anything. It hasn't won an award, but it's ended every conflict that it's ever been in. It's ended every single fight. And, of course I'm screwing with people, but it is true. And what I'm talking about is injury to the human body. You'll see two behemoths going at it, two amazing athletes going at it. And they're strategic with each other. It's usually a really good battle. And then an accident happens. A guy rolls up and maybe he snaps the other guy's ankle. or, he comes in and he pokes the guy in the eye by accident, and all of a sudden it's over. That's it. You see the ref come in and, they're taking the injury away. Well, in violence, that's where the beginning is. Once you get an injury is the beginning of violence, and it's the beginning of, taking out the other person. So that's where all the good information is. Where do these injuries come? And the injuries that we need to look at are all found in sports data, basically sports injury data. And the reason you want to look at sports injury data is because it's humans colliding with humans and humans colliding with the earth. And those are forces that you and I can replicate. And that's where these structures and sensory systems keep coming up in the literature of injury. And that's what we focus on. That's specifically what I teach people is how to do that. And you don't need a lot. Yeah, there's approximately 70 areas, and some of them have bilateral targets. So you're looking at right around between 120 and 130 areas of the human body that you can injure. But you only need a small portion of that to be really effective. You don't have to remember all those areas. You just have to understand, where to put your efforts. And that's the really interesting part. I mean, I love being able to train people in the skill sets of destruction and just watch their whole outlook change, and not giving them a false sense of security. They absolutely understand that they know how to exploit an opportunity that a predator gives them, and that's really all we're doing. All she did when she got grabbed for the Home Depot is she understood how to exploit that opportunity to get an injury. And this guy that grabbed her didn't see her as a threat, and that's where that's what I want for each one of my clients. If a alpha predator comes in and threatens asocial violence, that they do so in a way where they don't think this person is a threat, and they give them an opportunity. And hopefully my person's going to be able to exploit that opportunity.
Tim, I got a few more questions. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. One thing that you talk about is how we attract those who don't follow normal social rules. And will you elaborate on that? And what are some of the greatest mistakes that we make by attracting these type of asocial people?
It's not so much that we attract them. What I tell people, we don't recognize the difference between antisocial aggression and asocial violence. And really that's the big hallmark, for people is understanding the difference. The quote that I'm known for is a 2-part quote. And basically the first part of the quote is when violence is rarely the answer, is the first part. And everybody loves that part, because we all think about, yep, you're right, violence is, you can do that. The second part is the difficult part for most people, which is when it is the answer, but when it is the answer, it's the only answer. And that really is the hallmark. And basically what we're saying, the first part of that is antisocial aggression is avoidable and therefore does not need to be responded to with violence. But the black swan event of asocial violence, when you are facing imminent grievous bodily harm and you're devoid of choice, unfortunately the only tool that's going to get you out of there is violence, and you need to know how to use the tool of violence. And the way I best get that across, I talk about a story in the book of a young lawyer in London that got assaulted in a park by 2 guys. And they threw him up against a tree. They put knives to his neck. They demanded his watch, his wallet, his briefcase. I think he gave some other jewelry that he had. And he did all of that, and they left. The two guys left. And everybody loves that part of the story because he did everything that, especially the UK law enforcement tells people to do. Don't resist. Give them what they want.
By the way, you're banned there, right?
Yeah, I am banned there. And then they walked away and left, and that, and like I said, okay, great. He used his social skills, and it worked out really well. But then they came back, And when they came back, their heads were down, their knives were drawn. They ran up to him and they stabbed him multiple times and killed him. And people said they heard him screaming, why? I gave you everything. And literally what had happened was when those guys walked away, one says to the other, he saw our faces. That's probably not a good thing. And they literally just nodded. They both nodded, turned around, and that's as much thought as they gave to it. And they just ran him down and killed him. What I want any client of mine to know is the difference between the two situations. The first part of the situation where they were up against a tree asking him for his watch and his wallet, that is antisocial aggression, meaning there's communication going on. It's unpleasant communication, but there's still communication. And while there's still communication going on, you have the choice. I'm not saying you should. You have the choice to respond with your social skills. And if you can choose to try to use your social skills to talk your way out of the situation or get yourself out of there. The second situation, I want all my people to realize that, hey, that was imminent grievous bodily harm. There was no social involved in any of it. It was completely an asocial situation. And the only thing that would have worked for him in that particular situation is for him to be able to use a tool of violence to protect himself. And he didn't have anything. He didn't have anything in the toolbox for that. And that's sad. It's a really sad story. It really shook the UK when I was over there. When I first heard that story. But I think it's really kind of the hallmark of how to define between antisocial aggression and asocial violence.
What do you teach your kids about protecting themselves?
Two things with kids. I teach them communication, and I am teaching them movement. Like all of them are learning gymnastics right now because I think that's going to be a really good thing for the rest of their life. As far as I found the best practitioners in my stuff, and combat sports, martial arts, if they have a background in gymnastics or dance, believe it or not, they really understand movement. And if I have a guy that really understands movement and has really good kinesthetic awareness, I can teach them quicker. So I do that. But I have no illusions about child predators and a kid's ability to protect themselves. It's not even close to a fair fight. These child predators are savvy as hell. They know how to talk to kids. They know how to fool them. They know how to bait them. And so ultimately it's up to us as parents. And this does not mean we have to be, hover parents, helicopter parents, but we do need to understand that we cannot expect a young child to have the mental and physical wherewithal to be able to protect themselves. And the analogy that I use is, does the lioness expect the lion cub to do a little bit of training and be able to fight off a hyena? And, the answer is no. It's the lioness that has to be able to fight off the hyena. And it's going to be us that's going to have to take care of our kids. And our job is to get them to a point to where, yes, they can start, taking care of themselves. But that's going to be much further down the road than most of us would like. And unfortunately, you see all these reports where they'll put kids through self-protection training all day and then stranger danger and all of that. And then they'll run a controlled exercise where they use role players, and these role players within, literally under a minute oftentimes can talk a kid with a puppy or candy or something or some plea for help. They can get them into a car, even though they've just had this training right out the gate. Just mentally, kids mentally and emotionally aren't able to protect themselves from that type of a predator effectively. And I know it's not the answer anybody wants to hear, and I'm not anti-martial arts for kids. I think all of that's great. I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a good foundation. It all comes down to the instructor, but don't kid yourself. You're doing it because you want your child to, it would be good for, like, say, anti-bullying and stuff like that, for sure. Yes, a kid learning how to protect themselves, but don't think it's gonna somehow help ultimately against a dedicated adult that is, hunting children, basically. Mm-hmm. We just have to be very blunt about that.
You talked about in the book about cell phones and headphones and, people, a guy risking his life for his cell phone and maybe an attack on a train or a bus and nobody knew it because they were all staring at their phones.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the big thing, I just did a talk at Google, and it was great. I was invited to talk to all the Google, they have speakers come in all the time and on various topics. And this one really hit home with them because I showed the video that you're talking about. It's a video of a Seattle bus, armed robbery on a Seattle bus, where it's just incredulous. This guy literally is walking down the middle of the aisle of the bus with a blazing, just brazenly having his firearm out, putting it in front of people who are they're all immersed in their phones. And he's just, taking their phones, taking their, their stuff, but nobody's communicating with anybody. Then he finally gets into this one guy who's completely immersed in his video on his iPhone. The gun literally comes over the phone into his nose, and he's looking down the barrel of a gun. And to his credit, he redirects the gun, redirects the vector, penetrates forward, which is exactly what you should do. And now he's got this amazing opportunity because in his other hand, he has his phone. And he could easily use it to bludgeon the attacker, the guy with the firearm. Would have been a great move for him. But no, instead, he literally is taking his phone and trying to get it into his overcoat pocket as he's coming, towards this guy. So he's facing death. He's facing grievous bodily harm with a gun literally in his face. And his first movement after redirecting the firearm is to secure his phone rather than protect himself. It's just, that's how much these things have grabbed our attention. And they have. And I'm not one of these people that, bemoans the fact, we got to get phones. I don't think people understand how highly addictive it is. We've always talked about, I have a neurologist in one of my mastermind groups. He's a brilliant guy. And he was talking to us, and we were talking about, you've probably always heard the act of writing something down. If you're writing down your notes, you have a much better chance of retaining that information. And the reason being is, in your thumb, there is a nerve that basically, goes directly to the brain. And so it stimulates the brain when you're doing that. So that's the theory behind it. And so, he brought that up to us, and he goes, you guys all know about what I'm talking about. We go, oh, yeah. That's why we all take notes and blah, blah, blah. He goes, okay. What do you think would happen to the brain if both thumbs were working at the same time? What kind of stimulus do you think that would be? And we were just like, it hit us all at once. Sure. So when you were texting, the reason we often text when we could easily do a quick phone call and be much faster is because there's more stimulation to the brain having both our thumbs move and text. And people get caught up in all of that. And that's how powerful these things are. So what I try to point out to people is, here's what we're doing. We're willingly giving up sensory systems, when we're on here. And I'm not trying to tell people that, hey, you got to give up your smartphone. You just have to be smart about it. And you have to understand what you're doing to yourself in a public environment when you give up your sensory systems like this, and how powerful the draw is to this, and just the loss of situational awareness.
Man. Tim, there's a ton more I'd like to cover with you. When Violence is the Answer is an awesome book. The reviews on it on Amazon are all very, very, very positive. And, you talk about all kinds of stuff. I mean, how I think something like when you meet new people, you act like you're 6 seconds away from them opening fire, I think. And
yeah. And let me just explain, it's not a paranoid thing. It's like people people ask me all the time, they go, what, how do you go through life? And with people that I don't know, I assume another person, it sounds extreme, but when you think about it, it's actually a great way to live. I assume the other person is 6 seconds away from a shooting spree, and I don't want to be the person to trigger it. Therefore, how would you communicate with a person like that? Well, you'd be probably overly friendly, helpful, and you're not trying to cause any, major deals, major emotional deals. You're not trying to cause conflict or anything. And I found it to be a highly effective way of thinking about things when you're in unfamiliar areas. Because what happens is we get used to, say, at work, we talk to each other a certain way, and we can get away with things because we know all the players and we know how they respond to things. And oftentimes, if we use some of that, sarcastic humor or some of that aggressive behavior that works great in the boardroom amongst other individuals that aren't going to react violently to that, we use it out in the outside world with a bunch of people that we have no idea what their backgrounds are or how they look at things. You can get yourself in incredible trouble unnecessarily, and therefore, if you just look at things, and I give a very extreme example of treating somebody like they are literally 6 seconds away from a shooting spree to get the point across. Be nice, when you communicate. Don't go there right away. Don't hit the aggression unnecessarily. You have no idea how it could end up. You could get a disproportional response that you're just not prepared for.
How many times have you been on the cover of Black Belt magazine?
I think about 4 times.
Okay. All right. So I guess maybe we won't go into it here, but you definitely talk about, you give some examples in your life of how you've almost been in some situations and how you've remained calm. Well, when you remained calm and when you didn't until, I guess you saw the guy's little girl in the back of the car. And
right.
I don't know. I mean, if you don't want me to leave people hanging, you can tell it. But I just know that you give some great examples in your life as well. Have you restrained yourself? Yeah.
Well, I don't want people to ever think. I give a couple of examples in the book, and again, it's not to self-aggrandize. And I don't need to tell the stories right now. If people want to check the book out, they can see it. But the point of those stories is to let people know that, hey, I get it. I'm human. I know. One story I talk about is with my friends, and I ended up taking action in a situation that I had no idea the other person involved was stupid enough to bring a small child into the situation. And it was just jarring to see a small child look up at me and, basically crying, asking me not to hurt daddy. It was, still see it after all these years. And then another situation was when I was literally, my son's holding a magazine of me on a cover of Black Belt magazine, and I have a guy who thinks I cut him off, and he's just calling me every name in the book and challenging me and just, doing everything he possibly could to get a fight out of me. And I decided, just not take the bait. And my son was incredulous because he's a little guy at the time, and he thought being on Black Belt, being on the cover of Black Belt meant that you just had the right to go out and beat down anybody that, just didn't show you respect. And, that's the way little boys think. And, I had to tell him that, there's all sorts of realities to that. And so, but I did. I was incensed. I mean, there was my son, and this guy is making fun of me. But I also had to sit there and say, is it worth the risk? Is it worth the risk of me going out? Yeah, I probably could take care of the situation, but, what if the guy had a gun? What if I end up inadvertently, severely injuring him or killing him? And then now what am I dealing with? And, you just have to sit there and think of these things ahead of time. And that's really what the book helps provoke. It causes you to sit there and consider things that you probably haven't had to consider before. And it really gives you a really nice roadmap of how to live your life and minimize the chance of violence ever coming into it.
Well, what else in closing, Tim?
I just appreciate the opportunity that everybody has, and I would love to reach out to your people. Instead of just, I would love everybody to buy the book When Violence is the Answer. But if you go to whenviolenceistheanswer.com, just put your name where we ask for your email, and it says you should buy the book first, and you should, but I've released it so you can just get the modules. There's 10 modules that I did, 10 video modules I did to the book. It'll allow you to hear me go more in depth on everything. And then if you think it's worth it after hearing those, I would love for you to buy the book. Understand, I don't make much money off of the book at all. It's my publisher. But what you do by supporting me by buying the book is you're letting the publishing world know, in the world of media know, that this is an important subject and that we need to look at this, and that we don't need to stigmatize violence, that we have to make sure that law-abiding citizens have access to the tool of violence. And if they don't, then it's only going to be, like it is right now, where really the only people that have access to the tool of violence are the predators. And that's just wrong. It shouldn't be that way. And by looking at the subject, it doesn't make you a criminal. It doesn't make you a bad person. The reason I say violence is because self-defense and murder are things that are determined after you use the tool of violence. It's not something before. Violence is what allows us to go home to our loved ones, and using violence correctly, it's ruled as self-defense and justifiable. If it's a criminal use, well, then it goes in the criminal side of things. But violence itself isn't good or bad. It's just a tool, and we all should know how to use it.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim. I really, really appreciate you making time to be with me. And also, if you have another book coming out, do you have one in the works that you know of?
They want me to start another one. I need a break.
Okay. Yeah, it ain't easy to write one.
There is. I want to go more in depth in some of the subjects that I covered in this book. I uncovered a lot of really good material, but I think I'm going to give myself a break.
Okay. Well, if or when you do that, go that route, I would love to have you back on to talk about it, maybe early before it's released, to try to help get the word out.
Oh, that'd be great. Well, Thad, thanks so much for having me on and let me talk to you people.
Well, thank you for listening to my interview with Tim Larkin. I had a great time with him. I'm going to ask that you do two things. One is that you go to iTunes if you are an Apple user, and that you rate the podcast. Not only just a rating, a review would actually be better, but I'll take what I can get. I need honest feedback. I am pretty critical of myself, but actually I think it's accurate criticism of myself. I don't like listening to me speak, so I'll stop rambling here. Secondly, I'm going to ask that you check out my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Patriot to the core. And Patreon is spelled Patreon. This is just an opportunity for people to support. It's not really donations. It's where you get something in return, so you're considered a patron. Throw in a few bucks a month. That there are some options there, and you'll get early access to the episodes, a signed book, and there's a few other options there as well. So just something to consider to help support the cause here at Patriot to the Core. One of my goals was to get a new logo. I now have a new logo. I'm still not sold on it, but it's a lot better than it was. So I'll take that for now until I can get someone to modify it a little more, someone who can read my mind, basically. Thank you very much for listening. Your support is greatly appreciated.